Let's look at the AWS public cloud environment. I used Terraform to bring up entire environment, provisioned the virtual machines with shell scripts. In AWS, you can directly specify multiple network interfaces within virtual machines resources construct. AWS also allow GRE and all IP-based protocols. But most of the public clouds are limited to TCP, UDP and ICMP. But I had an issue with the routing. Router virtual machine had two interfaces. Both interfaces received default route. If the router picks up wrong interface, I lose the management connectivity. I exercised a small trick here. I wrote a small script to set up the lower metric for the backend interface in the router. Since it got the lower metric, routing table will list the backend interface routes as the least preferred route when two routes are listed for the same destinations. All other setups and configurations in AWS are a piece of cake, easy to manage. It was not hard to automate Azure. I wish Azure could make the API key generation quite straightforward like other clouds. API key generation is quite tricky. Originally, I started with GRE tunneling and then I stumbled upon a document saying that IP-based ACLs, GRE and IP tunneling are blocked within Azure. After which I shifted to Geneve and VXLAN overlay protocols. I didn't have any issue with configuring multiple interfaces. But I noticed a few warning messages from Terraform. Some of the resources syntax have been changed. For example, resource Azure VM virtual machine has been superseded by Azure VM Linux virtual machine and Azure VM Windows virtual machine. I couldn't specify the provisioners directly within the resources block. Once virtual machines are created, I used a null resource to connect back the virtual machines and then provision the virtual machines. Dual interfaces in Azure is automatically handled. We don't need to specify explicitly employ any fix to handle the asymmetric routing. Your first interface in the network interfaces list always used as the primary interface. In GCP, I didn't have any issue with configuring multiple interfaces. I could specify the provisioners directly within the resources block. Routing with multiple interfaces in GCP is automatically handled. No asymmetric routing issue. Your first interface in the network interfaces list always used as the primary interface. In OCI, virtual machine deployment and public APIs deployment sometimes 1 or 2 minutes faster than other clouds. Just like Azure, OCI API key generation is quite tricky. All other configurations are straightforward in OCI. Multiple interfaces creation involves two-step process. I can directly create the primary interface within OCI core instance. Any additional interfaces should be created outside resources block and should be attached to virtual machine. Interface tends to be down in virtual machine because you are attaching the interface after virtual machine build activity. However, you can fix this by using null resource, where you can log into the virtual machine and bring up the interface. It should fix the issue. There is no limitation with asymmetric routing in OCI. In Alicloud, I had an asymmetric routing issue with router virtual machines. Once virtual machines are provisioned, I created an interface and attached the interface with the router virtual machine. Just like AWS, the new backend interface was down. With the use of null resource provisioning, I could bring up the new interface with less optimal DH client metric. This fixed the asymmetric routing issue.